Thanks for being with us today. Hopefully you can see us and hear us. As we get started, take a look at the screen here. Think about where you live on this map of New York State. Think about which county you might live in, and then look at that big yellow star, right? Pretty much in the middle of New York State here. We are in Cortland County today, just north of the city of Cortland. And that's where we are broadcasting from. So you might live in whatever piece of the state that you live in, but today you'll be walking through the woods in Cortland County. So think about where you live and where you might live, how far away you might live from Cortland. Maybe you're close by, maybe you are across the country, but we are really excited to be here today in Cortland. So now that we have a lot of our friends joining us, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am really excited to introduce our friend John Berglund today, and he is a forester with Gutchess Lumber. And we are going to learn a lot of things today from John, but what I want to start with is that we are really excited for your questions. So if you would like to ask some questions during our time walking through the woods together and learning about forest management and forestry, feel free to put those in the Q&A box. We'll get through as many as we can, so feel free to pop those in. The Q&A box is down at the bottom. Type those questions in, and we'll try our best to get to your question. So with that, John, we'd love for you to introduce yourself. We're so excited to be in the forest with you today.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Berglund, and I am a procurement forester with Gutchess Lumber Company. The company, they purchase standing timber from individual private landowners, industry landowners, and also from municipalities. And the company employs somewhere, in the range people to contribute to the the local communities and economy, and they work all across New York State, parts of Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, to procure standing timber. Gutchess has 7 locations. They have their main Cortland mill. They also have a sawmill in Freedom, New York, which is south of Buffalo, New York. They have a mill in Vernon, New York, which is just south of Utica. They also have a mill in Brookville, Pennsylvania, which is central Pennsylvania. They also have a wood yard over on the Massachusetts border with New York. They also have a pallet mill in Preble, New York, just north of Cortland. And then they also have a dimensional mill over south of Pittsburgh, or in the Pittsburgh area, Latrobe. And today we're going to go through, what the idea is, purchasing standing timber, from working with a landowner, forest management, working with their goals to, conduct the management, and then also procure the timber so that we can make lumber and work with the forest products. So that's kind of what we'll review today. And we'll start with, right now we're in the woods, and this stand about 15, 20 years ago was a softwood stand, and it was harvested. And what we're looking at is a regenerative, what came back is mostly black cherry, some red maple, and hard maple. And the larger species, which were alive when the softwood stand was standing, is some of the white ash. And we're going to focus on the white ash today because there's a couple, in this area, it is being affected by the emerald ash borer. And so a lot of landowners are trying to harvest their ash because the bug which is an invasive species from Asia, came into the United States around 2001, 2002, around the Great Lakes. And what it does is it infects the mature bug, lays its eggs underneath, just underneath the bark, in between the bark and the wood and the cambium layer. And that little bug will eat that material, which is the life support of the tree. So that's why this tree is marked as a saw timber tree. The horizontal line is saw timber. And what we use to mark the timber is this paint gun here. We also put a blue stump dot on the bottom. So this is kind of the landowner's receipt, so that after the harvest, the landowner can go through and see that that tree was part of the timber sale, and it's kind of his receipt to for the sale.
So John, just to review, right now you are standing in a wooded area, what you're calling a tree stand, but this is a private person's property, and they've asked you to come in because they want to sell off their logs to be made into lumber. Is that right? Is that how that works?
Yes, correct. So to go through that process, we meet with the landowner, and we walk through their woodlot to see if there's any merchantable timber. Two, if what their goals are, whether there's wildlife habitat involved, or what their intentions are for another harvest down the road for the future. And we try and work with those landowners to come up with a rough plan to whether a harvest is needed now, or we need to wait a little bit longer for a harvest. But the idea is to, work with the landowner. And if there is a situation where, there is standing timber available to harvest, and it lines up with their goals to do a selective harvest, so that, we're not just, we have the future in mind to grow the residual stand and improve the residual stand for the future.
And I love that you said you put a mark as a receipt, because
Yep.
the landowner is getting paid for each tree that's cut down. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, that there's a little receipt so they know how much they're going to get paid for letting you come in and take the logs.
Yes, correct. And one quick thing I do want to show, what part of the timber sale that's important is removing trees that should be called out of the wood stand, of the timber stand. So we'll take a look at this tree right here, and this tree has an X on it. And the purpose of this tree is to be removed out so that we improve the residual stand, so that we can allow the cherry trees around it to benefit from the sunlight and nutrients that that will be provided once that tree is removed. And this tree right here is, it's kind of the low grade forest products. It could be cut and left in the woods. It could be cut and brought out for firewood, pulp material. But so that's part of the management part that is also very important. But getting back to purchasing, our goal when we do work with the landowner is to come up with a value for this tree. And there's a few ways. We could either use a Biltmore stick. This is one method. It can tell you the diameter of the tree. And then with the height, the 16-foot increments, it can tell you the board footage of that tree. And it can also estimate the height of the tree using the hypsometer right there. And the idea behind measuring these trees is to figure out how many board feet are in that tree. A board foot is 12 inches by 12 inches by 1 inch thick. So the idea is how many square board feet can we get out of this round cylinder of a tree? And how we do that, oh, go ahead.
So the product you're holding in your hand might be more familiar to people. They might see that at Home Depot, or might see the adults in their lives using that lumber product to build projects, or when they go past a construction site. And so you're trying to figure out how many pieces of that lumber can come out of that one tree, and that's how you decide your price?
Yes, correct. And so how we tally that is we can use, well, for measurement sakes, we also use the diameter tape also to come up with a diameter. So we'll go do this, and we do this at breast height as a quick term, but it's 4.5 feet roughly off the ground. So that tree is just shy of 16 inches. So we'll call that a 16-inch tree diameter. And then we will estimate the height of the tree. I already measured it with a hypsometer, but it's about 1.5 16-foot logs in that tree. So now that we have a diameter and a height, another piece of technology that we use to come up with this is our handheld, which is a data collector. So this helps the foresters in the woods record the data. So we're just going to go with ash. Diameter is 16 and height is 1.5. So with that information in, can anyone guess the amount of board feet that is in this tree? How many of these are in that tree?
Put your answers in the chat and we'll see. We'll throw out some of your guesses and we'll see what the equation says. So we have one guess of 20 board feet, another
20.
One of 100,
Mm-hmm.
16 for Mrs. Robinson's class. I'm getting 32, 35, 24, 72.
Very good guesses. And so the handheld, we bring this up. I think we had one estimate at 100, which, oh, my handheld turned off there. 96 board feet in that tree. 96 of these are in that tree. And so this is what, that metric is what we pay the, that determines the value of that tree and helps us give a price to the landowner so that we can purchase the timber standing. And, and that's a lot of it, is that, this industry contributes a lot to landowners and allowing them to hold on to the property and pay the taxes and whatever, costs that are involved with owning property. So
now, John, as we transition over to the landing, Mrs. Orr's 6th grade class has a great question for you and the work that you do. How do you identify this as an ash tree? How do you know?
Well, there's a lot of, to identify it is, the way we could tell is from the bark. A lot of the bark is tan, it has diamond shaped valleys in it. That's the quickest way. And then during the summertime, we don't have the leaves right now, but we can tell by the different types of leaves that species produces. And we learn this from, I went to a lot of the foresters. We went to 4-year colleges to receive our bachelor's degree. We also, some other students or foresters have received their associate's degree in forestry. And at both these locations, they can they will teach you the dendrology, or the, learning the species identification. So right now we're going to be felling the tree with Luke Gutchess. He is a timber harvesting contractor for Gutchess Lumber. And what he's doing now is he's making the face cut. This part is very important to the directional felling of the tree. The idea is that hinge wood, that face cut, is a direction the tree is supposed to fall. Now he's making a bore cut, and he's coming in from the back. He's gonna slide a wedge in. This will help keep the tree flowing in the direction it needs to be, and prevent it from falling back onto the chainsaw. Luke, he is one of our timber contract harvesters. He's 25 years old. He's been harvesting for Gutchess Lumber for about 4 to 5 years now. And he he's bought a skidder, a bulldozer, a landing loader, and a slasher. And all this equipment is beneficial to him to harvest timber and get it out of the woods.
Can you tell us a little bit about what Luke is wearing and why is it important? Yeah,
so he's wearing a hard hat with earplugs and a visor. This protects the, obviously his ears from the sound of the chainsaw. The visor protects his face from any chips or any debris that could fly back and hit him. And the hard hat protects him from anything falling down. And with working in the woods, there's lots of branches falling down onto, down and around in the area. A lot of stuff overhead that can come down on top of you. He's also wearing a set of chaps around his legs. This protects his legs from the chainsaw, which is it's a beneficial working tool, but it can cause great injury too if you make a mistake. His orange boots are Kevlar boots with steel toe. These help add more protection from the chainsaw and any logs or limbs or anything that could come down onto his feet.
And what was Luke doing just now? Why was he cutting the top of the tree off?
So the top of the tree is being cut off because that is where the the top part, there isn't much product in that top section. And so from the cut to the right of the cut and up is the part of the tree that we are utilizing from the woods. The part of the tree down to the left is the top, and this part is going to be left in the woods. And actually it's that is where most of the ready nutrients that can be broken down into the soil. That's where most of the nitrogen is held, all those nutrients that can be broken down back into the ground. Where the main stem that we're harvesting, that is mostly composed of, that's the carbon. That's the carbon that is stored into that tree.
Now, we saw Luke putting a big chain on the end of the bottom of the tree. What is that used for?
That chain choker is used to, it wraps around the tree and holds the tree, so the skidder can grab it. And now the cable is going to grab onto that chain, and he's going to winch the whole bunch up to the machine.
And that
And this,
tractor looking tool, a piece of equipment, that's the skidder.
correct, that is the skidder. Yep, yep. So they call that a hitch, is being winched up into the back part of the skidder. And that's where they drag it out into the woods, or out of the woods to the landing.
And about how many logs is Luke pulling out of the woods right now?
So typically right now there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trees being dragged out by the skidder. And once those are cut up into logs, that will roughly be anywhere from 15 to 21 logs. And logs are the kind of the final product of logging. And those are the items that are ready to be trucked to the mill.
Now, Charlie has a great question. He wants to know, how do timber companies protect the animals and wildlife that may live near where you're harvesting or inside of the trees you're harvesting?
Yeah, so great question. This part of, a lot of this happens during when we're out working with the landowner and marking the timber. Some of the things that we look for are den trees, and these trees are identified while we're marking timber, and they could be anything that has a cavity in the tree or a rotten hole in the tree. Sometimes, these trees we want to leave behind. One, they might not be beneficial to the sawmill because they'll have less value, but they'll have great value to the wildlife. So that part of it, we'll try to mark these trees with a W, or just leave them alone, and to promote, more cavities for wildlife to live in.
So you're taking a lot into consideration, aren't you, John? When you're looking at a forest, you want to make sure the wildlife are taken care of, that they possibly may have their habitat or some food from the tops of the trees that you're leaving behind. You want to make sure that the sunlight can get through to the healthy trees, take out the growth that isn't helpful to the healthy trees. And what do you think the hardest part about your job is?
I'd say probably the hardest part, the fun, I would say, let's start with working with the fun part. The fun part is working in the woods, working with landowners, getting a plan together, marking trees and being outdoors, whether that is, on a day where it's, -4 degrees out or 90 degrees. I think that's the fun part. I'd say the difficult part would be, it's just the problem solving part of logistics, harvesting, working with getting contracts off, and working with getting the jobs cut and out to the road. A lot of this has to do with, working with the weather. If the ground conditions don't support logging, and there's a lot of parts of permitting, working with town roads, and just making sure everything lines up correctly, so that we get the timber out in a economical manner for everyone. So
now, as we transition to the landing, Mrs. Davis's class wants to know, how many trees a day might Luke cut?
Luke, since his operation is more of a hand crew, a traditional hand crew setup, Luke can cut anywhere from, depending on the size of the timber, the density of the marked timber, anywhere from 40 trees to 60 trees a day. Now, there are other operations that, if we're looking at a mechanical crew, they could be upwards towards 80 to 120 trees a day, saw timber trees, for northeastern hardwoods.
Now, is there a best time of the year to harvest logs?
Yes, and I would say winter is probably the best time of the year to harvest timber. The reason for this is the ground conditions and the weather itself promotes for frozen ground. And this really limits the impact of that equipment on the ground. The water in the soil freezes up and it can support the equipment. You have less water issue, water runoff, less sedimentation, and the impact on the soil is minimized with frozen conditions.
Now, what are we looking at here? This is kind of the next step in the process. After the logs have been skidded out by the skidder, they end up here, and what happens?
Yeah, so right here, so once the harvested trees are skidded to the landing, this is kind of the processing area and pickup. The trees here are being picked up by the landing loader and they're being set down on this deck. This deck right here measures the tree into logs, and this is all done by the operator in the cab to the specific length: 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, 11 foot, 12 foot, 14, and 16 feet are typical lengths, and they all are supposed to have about 6 inches of trim. And so right now he's cutting that tree into a log, and he'll swing it over to the pile where it can now be picked up by the log truck. And that's where, once it's on the log truck, it heads off to the mill.
So they are working together pretty well over in this area. And it was a little hard to see, but in that first loader there, a saw has come down to cut it to the length that you want. Is that right? We saw a saw come down.
Correct. Yep. That is, it's kind of a larger, Luke was using a chainsaw in the woods, and this is just a larger version of that. And it is, it just cuts it up into logs. So, and there's all sorts of different kinds of, and that saw is called the slasher.
And so as they're working together to cut the logs, and then they are loading them on the truck, and then where does that truck go next?
So that truck will be headed to Gutchess Lumber Company, the mill, and this will be our mill located in Cortland, New York. And that's where the logs will be graded at the mill and processed accordingly into lumber.
Now we have some awesome questions coming in. And so we'll go through some of these questions as we continue to watch the cutting and the moving onto the truck. But we have one classroom that says, when you were talking about ground conditions and how winter is a great time to harvest, is there a time when you can't harvest timber?
Yes. The hardest times to harvest timber are during the spring and fall months when the weather patterns are wet, and when the ground conditions are too saturated to support the equipment. That's when we cannot harvest. That really limits what the equipment can do in the woods, and what kind of damage it may cause to the ground and the woodland, the timber lot.
Now, Mr. Bateman's 4th grade class wants to know, how much time does the crew spend out in the woods a day?
So the crew, Luke's in the woods all day. He'll start around 7 o'clock in the morning, and probably, during the winter months, probably 7 to 4, 7 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And then even in the summer months, even longer. he could be out 7 to 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. So it's a pretty long day. And, but they, you know, Luke is in it because he loves being out in the woods and he loves to, loves timber harvesting.
We have another great question. How many chainsaws might Luke go through on an average year's time?
He usually, I'd say probably at least one a year. You know, he'd probably have, I wouldn't be surprised if he might go through 2, but typically it's 1 a year. He'll go through a chainsaw once a year.
And Mrs. Robinson's class wants to know, what type of tree is worth the most money?
The most valuable standing timber tree is black walnut in the Northeast. I would say that is the, you know, that's the most desired. In our region, it's the volume of black walnut is pretty low. Majority of the black walnut grows in, you know, the Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky region.
Can you harvest fallen trees, or do they have to be standing to be useful?
There are a few trees that we do accept if they've blown over. Most of those species are prone, or, you know, rot resistant. Those species include black cherry, red oak, white oak, black walnut. But typically what we call the white woods, which is red maple, hard maple, birch, those species are very prone to decay once they're fallen over. And so we typically try and avoid, you know, harvesting or buying those trees if they're fallen over. But like, again, the black cherry, red oak, white oak, and black walnut are acceptable.
Now we have some awesome questions about the economics or the business of buying logs. And some of our classrooms want to know, are the prices up, down, or the same as previous years for lumber and wood products?
So currently pricing is up. And the desired species right now seems to be white woods. A lot of people like the lighter color of the white woods for cabinets, flooring, furniture. And so that demand for white woods has also increased the value of the standing timber. Hard maple, red maple, birch, white oak.
And we have one classroom that wants to know, do foresters ever make mistakes estimating the value of the standing timber?
Do they make mistakes estimating the value?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. You know, it's quite the process to, you know, measure the tree. And a lot of that is just kind of roughly taught once you go to, you know, college or the institution where you learn forestry. But if there can be mistakes, whether that is a miscalculation measuring the tree, or even another part that can, you know, if you misread the ground conditions, because a lot of these trees, you know, they're as good as what soil they grow on. So if they're growing on a poor site, and as a forester, you do not, you know, view that or realize that that tree is growing on a poor site, and you estimate either a higher quality value of that tree, that could, you can make a big mistake overestimating the, you know, the value of the timber coming off. This would include, you know, if, for example, if it was a ridge top where the soils are shallow, the timber can have hollow butts, which is an interior defect, which without the knowledge of the area, you might not know that.
And Jake from Mrs. Orr's class wants to know, when you do come across dead trees in your stand, what do you do with them? Do you work around them? Do you take them down? What's your procedure?
So typically we try to avoid working around them. But if it's needed that we do need to work around them, we do try and cut those trees down, because they can be a hazard to Luke if he was working around that dead standing tree. And the reason being is dead standing trees are more prone to fall over, or dead limbs can fall out of the tree much easier than live trees. The branches can become brittle, and it's a falling hazard for Luke. So we try and avoid them at the first chance that we can get, but if we do need to work around them, either we'll mark it as a call tree to be cut down to limit that hazard.
So Lily and Mr. Bateman's 4th grade class want to know, how many logs can you fit on that logging truck?
On average, it's probably 50 to 60 logs can fit on that log truck. And it all depends on the size of the logs, but it's usually right around 50 to 60.
And we probably just have time just for a couple more questions. We have lots of awesome ones here. So we have Mrs. Thaxter's class, and they want to know, what is the biggest tree that you might harvest?
The largest tree that we might harvest?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think back at, the largest tree that we can harvest really depends on, I guess, what can go through the mill, but the largest tree that I've ever come across probably was 42 or 45 inches diameter, breast height. So anywhere between 3 to 4 feet in diameter. And some of them can be as tall as, 60, 70 feet tall. But that kind of timber is pretty rare.
We have a great question about the environment and your impacts on the environment. A classroom wants to know, does the removal of trees affect your surrounding community? Does it create more flooding or runoff once those trees are removed from the forest?
So when we do a forest management and a timber harvest based off that forest management, the idea is that we remove the mature trees, but it also promotes the growth of the younger, more vigorous trees. And so it really, I think it's beneficial because it does, we're trapping that carbon in the lumber, and then we're promoting more trees to grow and trap more carbon. And those younger trees grow much more vigorous, and so they're collecting more carbon quicker at a faster rate. And I think those vigorous trees send out roots to hold the soil together, and they really do fill in the forest canopy, and take that spot where that mature tree was harvested.
Now, we have a comment from Mrs. Brooks' class. They asked in their inquiry box, they had something that looked like a hair clip. And what is that used for? Well, I don't think that John is using that hair clip in his beard or in his hair. But I want you to take a look at the machines that we're looking at right now. What does that clip look like it might do? So, and look at the job that the crew is doing. Think about trying to pick up pencils with that clip. How easy would it be to do that easily and accurately? This is a pretty tough job. moving those logs around. So think about that clip. Think about the work that they're doing, moving those big, heavy pieces of timber. Now, before we get to our last question, John, I do want to say this is really just the first part of the process. This is taking care of the land. This is making sure we have a good product to harvest, the harvesting procedure. But next week, we're going to spend some time at your mill. So once that log truck leaves, it's going, like you said, it's heading towards the mill in Cortland, and we're going to see how these logs turn into that piece of lumber. So we're really excited for next week. Now, the last question I have for you, and I really like it, it's from Nora. And Nora wants to know, John, what is your favorite tree?
My favorite tree?
Yes.
I would say my favorite tree is yellow birch.
And why do you like yellow birch?
I like yellow birch because it has, you know, the wood itself is nice. It's a nice color, but I really enjoy it because, you know, I cut and use firewood for myself, and it creates, you know, quite the aroma out of the. If you ever burn yellow birch, it creates a nice aroma around the house. So when you're working outside.
Well, we can't thank our classrooms from across the state, across the country enough for spending time with us this afternoon to learn about the timber industry. But we especially want to thank the two Johns, John Mueller and John Berglund, for spending this time and educating all of us about the job you are so lucky to get to do every single day. Thank you both so much.
Yes, thank you.
Have a great day. Bye, everyone.